I'm sure you've heard of them, the double-ender, full-keel blue water cruisers you find in every ocean-facing anchorage anywhere in the world. But I bet you didn't know they're from Taiwan. This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're talking about TAYANA. You've undoubtedly seen them around, and they're sort of like this old world mystic kind of a feel for a cruising sailboat. They look like they're made out of wood. In the double ender design, they make them feel so old, but also not in a bad way, kind of well traveled. When you see one, you can't help but to think, these boats have been everywhere, just by the look of it. And before we get into this particular brand, we should probably cover the elephant in the room. Coming up in the sailing world, I never personally considered that there were boats from Asia sailing waters this far from home. I always just assumed that sailboats were made from US, Canada, and of course, France. We've got like Catalina and C&C and Hunter and Irwin. That list goes on forever. And then, of course, you have the ever more popular boats from France, like Beneteau and Jeanneau. But Asian boats? Why would there be Asian boats here? Well, there are. Asia has a lot of brands like Formosa and Baba and Island Trader, and of course today's subject, TAYANA, and many of these companies marketed almost entirely to the US. For decades, they sold a lot of their boats right here on our shores, which that's pretty cool. Another interesting fact is that while Taiwan does make a lot of boats, a lot of cruising boats, a lot of sailboats, in Taiwan itself, there's just under 2,500 privately registered vessels. So almost everything they make is strictly for export to other markets. And we aren't talking about just 40-foot cruising boats. They make boats up over 80 feet. A man called C.T. Chen was a founding member in a boatyard in Taiwan called Taiyang in 1973. And they set out to strictly build what we here would consider a true blue water cruising sailboat. And as they were going to be exports as the main part of their sales, they made sure that what they built was actually a true blue water boat. And TAYANA isn't like your daddy's production boat either. TAYANA has been a world leader in custom order boats for decades. The price will reflect that a little bit, but what you get out of the factory is just about the furthest thing from a production boat that you possibly can. They offer exotic woods on the interior, Yanmar diesels, top-rated equipment from Lumar and other Tier 1 companies. The Taiyang Boatyard in TAYANA have, over the years, gained a reputation for being one of the nicest, most capable, comfortable blue water sailboats you might hope to ever buy. To talk about TAYANA, we have to talk about the one that you and I might actually buy, the one we might be able to afford to actually go cruising on. And that, of course, is going to be the TAYANA 37. They started building the 37 early on in their boatyard career, and because C.T. Chen, that guy we talked about, was a founding member, they just called the boat the CT 37. Because C.T. Chen sort of had a reputation in the boat building world, they figured the CT name would help sell the boat. And it did at first, but the boat was so good in its own right that it didn't need the clout of his name anymore. So they just called it the TAYANA 37 after a while, and sell they did. In all, about 600 of them set sail. And remember how I said custom? You could get the 37 under a few different nameplates over the course of the years, but it was designed by a man called Robert Perry, and it came in the time-honored cutter rig, which you'd sort of expect. Also came in a ketch, and if you needed more custom than that, they would even build you a pilot house. This 22,000-pound double-ender didn't offer a massive cockpit that you might want, but it was safe. With high gunnels and a tighter cockpit and large lifelines on the sides, you could do long ocean passages in complete safety, and her full keel makes her ideal for big seas and those cold overnight passages across the ocean from island to island. All the versions also come with a sea berth, wherever it's located. Remember, they're all custom, but you get a sea berth, so whichever crew member is sleeping will have a nice tight single bed with something on both sides so they won't be falling out all night. The boat truly is designed around being a safe ocean sailing boat, but it didn't entirely skimp on the luxuries of living space. You might also be wondering, as I was, why in the heck is it a double ender? And the proper term usually used to describe these is a Baltic stern. Robert Perry, the designer, was really the one who did this. He was world renowned at the time in the 1970s, and he was designing some of the most iconic boats of all time. So Perry had just completed one of his masterpieces, the West Sail 32. You may have heard of that thing. It was a monster, and the world was a little bit different place at the time. Between the energy crisis and the economy, a lot more people than ever were throwing caution to the wind, selling everything and sailing off into the sunset to have a simpler life down in the islands. And the West Sail 32 hit this nail right on the head. Cheap enough to make sense, heavy enough to weather anything and keep everybody safe, and just big enough to live on. The West Sail 32 was also, though, a double ender, and people were eating up that classic look. So, trying to cash in on the double ender sort of success, when Perry was asked to do the TAYANA 37, he used the design again, another double ender, and again, people loved it. However, instead of designing another Sherman tank of a boat like the West Sail was, which wouldn't sail to windward at all, he made the TAYANA lighter and more capable. Now, we've talked about full keel cruisers before, and the TAYANA does suffer from everything you'd expect it to suffer from as a full keel blue water type of boat. The huge wetted surface means that running under the engine is slow and not very economical. One owner said it backs up like a drunken elephant. It's probably accurate. The other issue is that the diesel tank was up in the V-berth, and it's not a small diesel tank. This sort of highlights one of the big problems with this arrangement. So the tank would hold 650 pounds of fuel when it was full. Top that off with, let's say, a few hundred pounds more of anchor chain, and I'd probably opt for a 55-pound anchor on this boat. And she will sit with her chin in the water when she's sitting still, which hurts sailing characteristics. It hurts the economical ability of the boat to travel through the water. Robert Perry, however, did not design the boat this way. He wanted the tanks amidship, under the settees, which seems to make sense. If you have 650 extra pounds you got to put somewhere. It does highlight that problem, though, where if you have a designer working in the US, but he's working with a boatyard literally on the other side of the planet, the designer's job is, of course, to make the best boat he possibly can based on the criteria requested of him. And he did. The builder's job, however, the people who actually have to sell the thing, their job is to sell as many boats as they can. So there's a bit of a conflict there. So, Robert Perry puts the heavy tanks amidship, and the Taiyang boatyard moves them into the V-berth. And that way they get storage under the settees instead of having fuel tanks there, which storage under the settees is a huge selling feature for somebody who's going to live on this boat. I couldn't imagine not having storage under the settees. And when you go to see the boat brand new, you can be pretty sure the dealer is not going to fill those big tanks up in the V-berth, so you won't actually know that there's a problem yet. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to keep this channel improving. I'd like to give a big shout out to the newest patrons this week, Scott and Eric. Thank you guys rock. Now, as an ocean-going sailboat aimed squarely at cruising couples, the boat really lends itself well to have a crew of 2 people. Tall cutter rig, but it's easy enough to handle with just 2 people. But you aren't going to be the boat that's entertaining guests when you get to the anchorage. We're going to have to leave that for the hunters, I think. The cockpit is set up for 2 people with comfortable room if you have to have a third person, but you know, it's more aimed at 2. And that seems to be a hate it or love it sort of design function. If you're the more private type of couple, this really would work well for you. If you're the more social cruiser, you probably will get frustrated with the layout. Another downside is that the interiors, the cabins, were all teak. And I think that speaks to the type of person who might actually like this boat. The more private couple who keep to themselves, they also seem to be the type of people who like a darker interior, more wood. I've met a lot of these more private cruisers in my travels. They're fantastic, they're really nice people, but it always does ring true. They seem to like the idea of an older, a lot of teak, maybe a double ender, tight cockpit. There is a market for that. And the teak is beautiful, but it does make things very dark inside the boat. And you can bet you're going to spend a lot of time oiling and varnishing and taking care of that teak, which, I mean, it's kind of fine if you're not the type that's going to be out socializing anyway. Before I do my final thoughts on TAYANA, you may notice it's hot in here. And the reason for that is it's very hot outside today. It's what you guys would call probably 85, 90 degrees. And when I have the camera going and the microphone on, I can't have the fans or the air conditioner or the windows open because you will hear everything. So I just try to do a quick video shoot, and it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter under the huge lights that I have. Anyway, so final thoughts on TAYANA. The boat, it has something going for it that you might not expect. It has one of the most robust and devoted owners associations of any boat I've ever come across. And it's such a custom order boat. It would be so hard to find an expert on something like that because they're all different. So when you do have a problem, it's hard to get help. But TAYANA is different. The owners are an amazing and welcoming bunch of people with all the knowledge you might ever want about the boat. And that's sort of a double-edged sword for me. For you, the buyer, that's an immeasurable value having that support system. For me, however, the guy who's making a video trying to get you to go look at these boats if you're in the market, I have to be very careful not to get it wrong. I loved learning about this boat, and while I've only ever been on one, and it was in Anchorage, I loved the boat too. I hope you guys take a look at them. And for the owners, I invite you to comment below, share your experience and your knowledge on this amazing boat. If you like learning about sailboats with me, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I will see you guys next week.